So, Derrick Chauvin case, killing George Floyd last May in 2020 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, sparking the George Floyd protests and the BLM protests. Derrick Chauvin is guilty of all counts of first, second, and third degree manslaughter, as well as murder. He's facing potentially 80 years in prison, which for a man who's 45 years old, that's life sentence. Is this a victory? Of course it is. This is something that should be celebrated. We should be relieved that someone who used, unconstrained force on a subdued target already, choking him with his knee on the back of his neck, someone like that, especially someone who's had prior convictions, should be in jail. That's someone who deserves to be in jail. But is this an overall victory? That's a good question. Because on the one hand, you have victory for and resolution for a large-scale protest that happened over the past year. And now that he's gone, George Floyd's family can finally be at peace, knowing that their family member's killer is behind bars, or will be behind bars, I should say. But with that being said, anybody, I've seen this on Twitter, anybody can be a sacrificial lamb. No matter how powerful or small you are, anyone can be used as bait to keep your hands off the big fish. Who's the big fish? The system as a whole. The United States police as a whole spends more on its police department than, with the only exception of China, its military, more than every other military in the world. We have a military number one, China number two, their military, and then our police department at number three as the highest expenditures. This goes to show that there's a rapid militarization of police forces, and this shows that they can start to use more and more deadly types of, larger, more deadly arsenal of weaponry and tools to subdue people that have a higher rate of casualty or high injury rate. There's a lot of money being spent into the United States Police Department, United States Police Force, and I think that, while yes, this should be celebrated, I think it speaks to a larger picture, because this very same day, there was a 15-year-old girl who was killed in Columbus, Ohio, by a police officer. She was shot 4 times. What had happened is that she was being attacked at her home from a home invader. And when she had shown up, she had been attacked by someone at her house. I shouldn't technically say home invader. That's not the proper terminology. And she was, I guess, in a fight. And she had called because someone had been abusing her at that moment. And when the cops showed up, they thought she was the perpetrator and shot her 4 times. Now, me personally, as just a rule of principle, I don't think kids should be killed. I mean, call me crazy, but when your brain's still developing, I think a lot of kids make, some decisions they don't regret. And I think this instance, despite this not having to do nothing with the kid making a choice, the kid called the police for help, and when help arrived, they killed her. I don't think murdering a child in any instance is reasonable. Not at all. And that's just my matter of principle. Because I think children can be rehabilitated, but this has nothing to do with them. What does this little side story have to do with the grand picture? Well, just because Derrick Chauvin is in jail does not mean the whole, the system's going to stop. It's not going to come to a halt because they're so scared of being, arrested. There's been, if I read this correctly, 15 officers in the last 14 years who have been tried for murder and found guilty of murder of a civilian in the last 14 years, since 2006, so I guess technically 15 years. 15, one per year is basically what it averages out to. But since 2006 as well, there's been over 150,000 plus people killed by police officers. This speaks to the fact that there is a lack of real training to put these officers in that position. Now, I understand that, there are a lot of good officers. There are a lot of good people that want to help their small communities. But when you have someone out in the field that really shouldn't be there and they can't handle the pressure, you shouldn't be an officer. No matter how much you want to do good, you can do it somewhere else where you won't have to put someone else's life in your hands. So I think this is a small victory, but one win in a 1-16 season is not something to celebrate. I think we should be glad that he's behind jail, but I think this is not a time to ease back on focusing on how to reform or dismantle, if you're a little bit farther to my left, the police force. I think you could redistribute those funds to more mental health services, to better community education, and better relations with community and police officers in every small community or a large community, however large or small. I think there needs to be a sort of bonding, and there needs to be a reestablishing of trust. So when there is a lack of trust, the police officers don't trust the civilians, and the civilians don't trust the police officers. And I think the civilians have a justified reasoning for that. So I thought I'd just talk about that since I just got home, and I'd seen it a few hours ago, but I hadn't really had a chance to, talk about it. I've been driving for a while. So